Welcome to Dev Interrupted. I'm your host, Andrew Ziegler.
And I'm your host, Ben Lloyd Pearson.
This week, we're looking at how Cloudflare is using agentic AI, an interesting new partnership between AI and consumer culture, how developers really feel about their code assistants, and a special anniversary that only nerds can celebrate. Ben, what catches your eye?
Well, I think I'll save the celebration for last. So maybe let's start with the new partnership with AI.
Yeah, so there's been some interesting news in the last week of OpenAI partnering with, of all companies, Mattel to create and design new products without necessarily licensing the toy maker's intellectual property. Key detail. This isn't a partnership of Mattel somehow giving training data to OpenAI, although I'm not sure how useful that would really be. But instead, this is a partnership to create an end consumer product, the creation of digital assistants based on Mattel characters or games that are more interactive within the Mattel universe. We're all pretty familiar with Mattel's recently branched out into things like mobile games and even making movies. You might remember the Barbie movie that came out in recent years. And so uh, OpenAI has also been courting companies that help them enhance their products. So it's an interesting collaboration between two companies that you wouldn't necessarily expect to work together. And their first collaborative release is expected to come out later this year.
Yeah, recently I've been thinking a lot about like why is it software engineering that's getting all of the focus with AI disruption? We have like all these companies, like the company that built Cursor, like they're rumored to be generating like $500 million in revenue, which is like pretty crazy. But at the same time, like there are so many other fields out there that have, I personally think, way more potential for disruption, potentially even faster than software development. Like, Andrew, just think about the amount of content that we produce here at Dev Interrupted. Like that has been completely transformed by AI already. Yet there aren't a whole lot of products that are coming out, and there's not a whole lot of focus on that market for some reason. So, this story is a little bit outside of the typical beat here at Dev Interrupted. It's not about engineering or anything like that, and it's certainly not about producing like higher volumes of code with AI. But I think what's really happening here is that we're seeing all these stories about how AI companies are fighting in courts over intellectual property ownership, and I think the future is really going to be built, at least in AI, by companies that have good training data. Like the better your training data is, the better your models are going to be, and if you have poor training data, your models are going to reflect that. So I can easily imagine a future that we may be moving towards where there's new regulations, new laws around the use of intellectual property within generative AI. And I think what's happening is OpenAI is trying to use IP to establish a moat. Like if they build these partnerships with third parties and get access to their commercial data, that actually starts to build a bit of a moat for them where they have high quality training data that they potentially are the only ones that are able to use. So in the meantime, I might take a whirl to see if I can, maybe work with Chat GPT to come up with some really cool car designs with my 4-year-old, because that does seem like a really fun application of this.
Were you a Hot Wheels kid, Ben?
I was the gigantic box of cars that were collected through many generations of children's.
I was also that kind of kid, but I had a lot of Hot Wheels. And in fact, this is full circle for me because my very first computer was the Windows 98 Hot Wheels computer, the very iconic
Incredible.
one. I had all of the accessories. My dad got it for me for Christmas. It probably honestly sparked all of my downstream interest in technology, and probably without having that Hot Wheels computer, I don't know if I'd be on this podcast. So it's really fun to see it all come full circle. Hot Wheels and Barbie computers and their users unite.
Yeah, I never would have thought that 8-year-old Andrew Ziegler could make me-year-old Ben jealous, but here we are. I now
It
want
was truly
to go back in time.
transformative, a formative. It was really a formative experience having that
Yeah,
computer.
yeah,
Wow.
awesome.
All right. So next up, let's see. Let's talk about an interesting thing I saw out of Cloudflare in the last week. There was an article from Max Mitchell that dove into the Cloudflare's Claude generated commits around using agentic AI to work on parts of their code base. And it was really interesting to on two levels. You have Cloudflare engaging in this really thoughtful practice of encouraging their engineers to directly commit the prompts they use to generate code along with the code into source control. This is a smart way of reducing the ambiguity of code ownership and also being able to communicate about what the tool is supposed to do or what the commit is achieving. It also allows a team to build best practices because you're saving all of this great record stuff right into your source control. Obviously, your mileage is going to vary. There's going to be some cases where it doesn't make sense to put that kind of thing in the metadata. But this was a really interesting analysis at how Cloudflare used this tool. And there were things that stood out to me and also to Max, who wrote this article about how there's some things like where humans are still intervening, like moving certain files around or doing some cleanup or doing some renaming. There were some cases where I think the tool they were using was Cursor, or otherwise was trying to use like a bash command to just move a file. Like there's sometimes times where it's helpful to step in, and you see this in the commits because that thought process of I would have been faster if I'd done this myself is right in the commit. So a pretty cool exploration. I really loved on top of it Max's actual like really thoughtful personal journey, looking through all of those commits himself and reflecting on what that meant about their development process. So really great article all around.
Yeah, you know, I really love how the engineering culture as a whole, like software engineering culture, is really great at just being transparent and sharing ideas and like trying to help each other build best practices. Like, so, and you know, I've been saying for a little while that like now is the time to be experimenting and learning with AI. There's not a whole lot of like revolutionary productivity improvements happening yet, but there are a lot of people learning very interesting things about how to apply AI to software engineering. And the reality is that like the tooling in this space is still extremely immature. Like the people who are building AI workflows right now are mostly still doing it through bespoke custom operations. That's just the fact of the of reality today.
Yeah.
And you know, so I love seeing these like firsthand or even like this is kind of like a secondhand experience of AI because there's still just so much to learn about applying AI to existing workflows and you know getting the most out of it. But you know, Max made his points better than I ever could. So you know, our audience really just needs to go to the show notes, go check out the article, go learn something about AI today from somebody who's in the trenches with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what's our next story, Andrew?
I love this article that came out from Lead Dev last week. This one's written by Chantal Kapani, and it actually features a quote from myself in it, as well as many folks in the developer productivity, developer experience field. But what I liked about it the most is that it built on a narrative that we've all been experiencing and talking about that, just unchecked and goalless AI adoption doesn't help anybody. And it doesn't ultimately deliver on the promises that that y'all can't even seem to agree on in the first place. Like, I really what I'm saying in all of this is that AI coding assistants and their adoption across different organizations is not just like a one and done 0 to 1 process. There's a lot of communication that has to happen to make that successful. And part of that is getting your engineers on board. So this is an article that looked at how devs don't necessarily feel more productive when AI assistants are just put in their hands. It needs to be coupled with things like effective onboarding strategies, education, examples like this Cloudflare example we just talked about. What a great vehicle for making your devs feel more productive with assistant AI because you can point to this fantastic resource to show them how it works for your own organization. But there's a real disconnect in those kinds of examples at most organizations, in software engineering, which is what this article looked at. And this kind of is something we've been talking about a lot on Dev Interrupted, which is why I really resonated with the final piece. And it's about that, like, velocity isn't everything. Just because you're going fast doesn't mean you're going to the right place. And we had an article that we dropped last Thursday on Dev Interrupted. We've been doing more
Yep.
Thursday sends recently. You should go check them out. And literally, the article is called "Faster Coding Isn't Enough." It talks about exactly this. So check out this article in the show notes from Chantal about AI coding assistants and how devs really feel about them.
Yeah, and that article was based on some research that we conducted, and as well as a workshop that we held recently. We brought in experts from AWS, Atlassian, ThoughtWorks, people who really know a lot about the forefront of AI. Came in and talked about the struggles that engineering teams are facing today. And as a part of this work, we conducted a survey, and we asked participants about their AI usage, and found that the vast majority of AI adoption has been centered around the coding process. And we all know as engineering leaders that more. Sorry, got lost there. So we all know that software engineering is way more than coding, and you have to do things like planning, designing, architecting, testing, deploying. Like all of that is a critical component of the software delivery lifecycle. And AI has hardly scratched the surface outside of the IDE. Think of the theory of constraints. Like if all you do is generate more code, you're creating new bottlenecks. You're not necessarily producing more impact. And that's why you need to have complete visibility into where AI is being deployed, what it's impacting, and where your team is being slowed down. And this is actually my favorite part of what we're doing here at Dev Interrupted right now. Everyone is early on in their journey to AI driven development, and we get to be here to learn from these amazing, amazing experts within our community and share their knowledge with our listeners and our readers. So there's a lot of pressure right now to adopt AI to move faster. Don't put all that pressure on your developers. It's our responsibility as leaders to be strategic about how we deploy AI and to demonstrate the positive impact that it's having on the organization without overburdening developers with new challenges.
Yeah, well said.
So we've got one last fun story. So what do we have here, Andrew?
Yeah, we're ending this on a fun note. So congratulations on creating the 1 billionth repository on GitHub. Maybe we can edit in some
Ta-da!
confetti or some some fanfare here. This is a fun article, or rather, this is like a fun news tidbit, really, that made its way onto Hacker News. Someone created what ended up being the 1 billionth repository on the GitHub, repository service, and the result was people swarmed the repository to congratulate the owner, and obviously probably whatever they actually had in mind for that repo got derailed. But it did bring to mind a bunch of fun discussions. You should really go check them out in this comment thread about engineers at places with like IT help desks or huge data lakes and places where they have a gazillion of certain kind of IDs and people trying to game certain systems to snag very recognizable or huge rounded numbers like a
Yeah.
billion. So Ben, have you ever gotten like the zillionth ID on something?
Yeah. Well, this is a funny story because the user who created this repo chose a very common swear word to name it, and it all took off when a GitHub employee just showed up and left a comment like, "Hey, congratulations on being the billionth repo on GitHub." Yeah. So, first of all, rest in peace to that poor developer's GitHub profile who is now, I imagine he's in the mountains of Nepal somewhere trying to get away from it all with all the attention that has suddenly come down. But fortunately, we've covered some stories in the past where like some developer goes viral and the developer masses descend on them and have all sorts of negativity. This has not appeared to be that case. There's been a lot of just lighthearted and positive humor around it. So a lot of typical developer memes. Like it's a pretty funny thing. But yeah, I would wager a bet that this particular developer, figured out that this moment was coming and had some sort of script that was just waiting to capture that billionth spot. And if that's the case, like kudos, he did it. Like good for you. I wouldn't be surprised if there was a whole bunch of other developers out there who are disappointed because their script did not capture the billion.
I was about to say, I think this might have created some villains for sure. I can imagine there were a whole bunch of folks who were like, that number was supposed to be mine.
Yeah, imagine being the billionth in one repo.
That's what I'm saying. Someone is that. Also, imagine being the one before it. That's a lot of nines.
Yeah. Well, I think
Oh
it was the
well.
same developer too. If you look at the history, I think they tried to
Oh,
they
okay. So
did it
now we're
to
getting now we're getting down the
yeah.
logs. All right, ladies and gentlemen. Well, we're gonna get to the bottom of it and let you know.
Yeah. Yeah, developing news. We'll follow up if anything else comes out. So Andrew, tell us about our guest today.
Yeah, in just a moment, I'm chatting with Philipp Schmid from Google DeepMind. He's an AI developer relations expert, even has expertise from Hugging Face as well. We're going to get a closer look at Vio and Gemma and learn about how startup culture works inside of a large org like Google. I do want to kick things off because today we're chatting with Philipp Schmid. He's a senior AI developer relations engineer at Google DeepMind. And his background also includes being a technical lead at Hugging Face. So Philipp's career path is a preview of what modern AI native teams are starting to look like as product focused engineers with AI driven learning loops and a whole new way to think about scaling knowledge and productivity within your org. And today we're diving into how AI is fueling the need for these generalist engineers that maybe wear multiple hats, but they flex the best muscles that they have because of the skills they have available. And AI assisted self education is reshaping that whole process, including onboarding and skill growth. And we're going to dive into what some of that means for a small startup like environment like DeepMind within a big tech company like Google. It's going to be really interesting. So, Philip, thanks so much for joining us on the show.
Thanks for having.
So at the beginning here, I want to kind of set the scene for Google DeepMind. It's a smaller kind of startup like organization within Google, and your team is building and advocating and educating, doing really whatever it takes to move fast and scale adoption. And it's a new kind of engineering culture where the contributors are expanding what they work on, and it's changing what success looks like. You're always redefining it. So, Philip, help us have a glimpse at what it's like working in an environment like Google DeepMind within Google.
Yeah, I think I would say still hard to say that's like a startup. I mean, Google DeepMind grew a lot in the recent years. There was like this merge with like Google Brain a couple of years ago. And I think now it's like a few thousand people. So it's like not like 10 to 20
It's
anymore.
huge. Yeah.
But like inside the scope of like Google and like Alphabet, it is really still much different and like much more like action driven. And I mean, you probably have seen like that the last few months with like Gemini and Gemma has been like completely crazy from like shipping on a weekly basis to like
Yeah.
new models, new features everywhere. And since I joined in early February, we started to have like a DevRel team and really like trying to push towards helping developers build a community and really help everyone kind of to adopt the models, as if you only have models available and nobody knows how to use them or have like not great documentation, you will not win at the end.
That's right. And so, you talked about it being small and then now it's huge, several thousand folks. That's a good call out. Like Google DeepMind is big, right? And how fast did that growth happen? And what was it structured like?
So I
Do you know?
joined in February, so I'm like also still super new. I know that there was like a refocus from like Google as an org itself to really push, hey, AI is really something important. We need to work all together. That's where this like kind of merged with Google Brain and DeepMind back then happened. And now like everything AI related is basically under Google DeepMind. It's from Google Gemini, Google Gemma. There's a lot of research going on which might not be as like publicly visible with like generative AI. There's a lot of work with like in the protein. I mean, AlphaFold is coming out of DeepMind. There's a lot
Yeah.
of work with inside weather and machine learning. There's a lot of research happening, and of course, like with generative AI becoming mainstream, we need to move towards more like product-based approaches, and that's like where, or since then, we have like a more product team. We have AI Studio as a like a real developer kind of environment, and also now like a DevRel team where I'm part of, where we try to really help everyone build with the available DeepMind models.
So that seems like a next level of it's almost like a multidisciplinary approach to AI and applying it to use cases and figuring out how to productize it, but also figuring out what's going to be the long-term impact. You touched on some things like, like proteins and such, like places where you could use AI to create new medicine or solve like life-changing problems, right? And as you experiment and kind of try out these new use cases, it requires a certain kind of mentality as an engineer, not the traditional mentality of like you write the code, you ship it, but a new mentality has a lot of experimentation, and the lines blur between roles. What does that look like as like someone who works like as a developer relations engineer? Do you find yourself doing a lot of different multidisciplinary tasks?
Yeah, I think like especially developer relations have like a much different job than they might used to have like a few years ago. And then if we look
Yeah.
back even further, there was no developer relations engineer at all. And especially with all of the AI hype and AI evolvement, software engineering is becoming much different than it used to be, right? We have like much more supportive tools from like special code editors like Cursor or Windsurf, which help us a lot to be much faster. We have now like completely full autonomous agents with like tools with OpenAI, Codex, there's Claude Code. So there's a lot of more tooling for developers, which wasn't there a few years ago. So they need to adjust how you develop software, and then also how fast you can ship software changed a lot. I mean, like cloud is still like getting popular, but like I think now like a solo small team individual can like ship and like produce and create so much more than it used to be a few years ago. And like what we see and like what I see, especially when like talking to developers and to people, is like the team size gets much, much smaller,
Mm,
and much more people can develop things which they might not have been able before, right? 5 years ago, when you look into an enterprise company, you have had very clear roles in software development. You had backend engineers, front-end engineers, architects, designer, quality engineers, like many different roles. And all of
right.
them kind of become now like just, okay, you are a software engineer and you need to do front end, you need to do back end, you need to define, okay, how am I or where am I going to deploy my application? And it's like more that it's not that we have AI software development, it's more like that there's a new kind of software development. I think we used to call it full stack, but now everyone is kind of a full stack engineer with AI because you get so much support. You can like ship some task or hand over some task to the AI, which you might not be experienced enough to do, or where you think it might be easier for the AI to do like some very simple UI applications or just designs can now be done completely autonomous. And yeah, like you have way more different like tasks and roles, and maybe in a few years or even a few months from now we like look back and think, yeah, software development kind of evolved even further to just being a manager where you like need to look for your different like small agents or tasks, what are they doing, and like where do I need to intersect, where do I need to help them, and then things become much more autonomous.
Yeah, that's what we're seeing when we talk with folks on this podcast is that exact anecdote about, engineers that are the definition of full stack has now extended into everything. It's like, beyond full stack, right? And what you get is an engineer who's responsible for the decisions behind the actions taken more so than the output directly, which requires a different skill set, a different mindset going into the work that you do. So, Philip, what do you see from like successful people who adopt this mentality? Is there something that they all have in common or something that makes them stand out as being able to work in this kind of flexible way?
I think like what really stands out is the the people who are very open to adjust how they work, very open for a change, and really like trying to use modern technologies. Because I mean, it's the same with like when the internet came. It will not go away. Like AI will not go away. And yes, maybe now it's like not good enough, or I can code it myself faster, or I really like to go like coding, but like this will change, and you need to really be able to use AI and to know how you can like benefit from it, because otherwise someone else will come in and like do the same work as you do, but maybe more productive or more efficient or can do more of it because they use AI. And what also like really helped me or helps me is like not only like focusing on the technical aspects, right? Really thinking about, okay, what am I trying to solve here? What am I trying to build? And like not think too much about, okay, am I going to use React or Vue for like the implementation? Because at the end, if I use some kind of code editors and they help me to build it, I can build a React application and Vue application if I know like how JavaScript works and how like all of the things work. And then I just focus on like building and like solving the problems rather than on like the typical like software engineering mind. Okay, I will use Postgres and Java backend with Spring Boot and all of those things. And I think those become more and more shallow because we really want to solve something and like build something. And I guess it will not matter that much if it's going to be written in Java or like in Angular or like whatever tool at the end.
Right. It also just depends on, like, picking a framework that has a lot of examples is
Yep.
also very strong, because then you have a lot of it in the training data. That's why you see things like React just going faster and faster. We talked with Lee Robinson at Vercel, and the web, nothing evolves faster than the web. So the web is feeling this in the way that people work with this technology, really, especially. And he was really calling out how people there's you're not really seeing as much specialists as you are generalist
Yep.
engineers who can spread across all of those weak spots that they might have had before. It doesn't matter if they pick, Vue versus React, because they understand the principles that underline it, and they understand what the end goal needs to do, and that's actually all they need to connect the dots. And so there's like two different work styles. You have using the agents to do the work and move faster, but then also using the agents to learn and build your own skills. That way you can then be a better manager to your AI agents. And like personally, I'm really drawn to how folks use tools like Gemini to like get up to speed really fast and almost have like a personal tutor. And recently, Dev Interrupted was actually a guest at Atlassian team. And there I listened to Ben Gomez, the SVP of Learning and Sustainability at Google. And he talked about using LLMs this way, in a Socratic approach of asking questions, going for deeper analysis with an LLM, and using it to teach yourself, not just by giving you the answers, but by asking you those critical thinking questions that you need to level up how you're looking at the problem. I'm wondering, how do you see LLM driven self education changing the ways that engineers are learning new tools, especially like yourself in your role, where you are creating like a large surface area that developers are trying out?
No, I think it's like super important. Like what we see is like the one side thinking that Cursor and all of like the other AI tools will replace software engineer. And I'm more on the other side that yes, we will have a lot of like autonomous stuff, but Cursor will not solve like some weird Stripe problems or like might not do like a proper Git stuff. So we really need software developers for a very long time, at least for the next few years from my point of view. And if you now get started with like learning how to like learning a language, trying to become a software developer, the easy path is like use Cursor and like copy paste whatever code it does. And if it doesn't work, like try fix me 5 times. Like it is a bit like how it was like 10, 15 years ago, where you just copy stuff from Stack Overflow. And if it didn't
Right.
work, you copied like the second answers and like until you kind of like had it solved. And I think like the better approach to it is like really use Cursor and all of those AI tools, but more also to help you teach. Like, I mean, it never has been easier to learn how Git works and like the Git commands with having LLMs explain you the concept, having LLMs create you some kind of like visual, like charts, graph. You can create super simple, like your own kind of tests and like check, okay, how good am I? And then like go into details if you really have no idea what's better. Like, should I use like rebasing or should I like directly merge into like main? And like this hasn't been possible before, except you pay a lot of money for like those different boot camps. And now you can like really do it on your own with your own pace in your own like depth or dense into something. And it's like, it's really cool. I think it might sound scary now to become a software developer, but I think there never has been a better or easier time to get started with software development. And especially if you learn not only how to use those tools, also like how the concepts work behind the scenes, then you are one of those software engineers or developers who doesn't care if he uses Vue or React or Next.js. You know all of the principle, you know how like state management works, how like the different updates happens on like inside the HTML, and then you can like just use it. And I think like something which might not be talked too much about it is also that it feels like it's much easier to ask something where you feel not like secure with an LLM
Mhm.
than like to a real person, right? If you are new at a job or you are a junior engineer, and you might not understand a certain concept, might not understand a certain library or how like some code works. Like asking your colleague or a senior engineer could you make feel insecure, or you might be worried that they think something bad about you. And now with like LLMs, like it's not a person you are talking to, and it's really like more of a like a protected space where you can learn on your own tempo and like with your own style. And I think that's like the best way on how people learn, because like everyone is very individual. Like some people prefer like practical examples or listening to it or like seeing something or reading long text, having like bullet points. Like everyone is like super individual.
Yeah, that's so spot on. I recently onboarded for a role, in the last year since AI has been on the scene. And the thing that was different this time is I joined and suddenly all of the tools I used had an LLM or a chatbot or some kind of like tooling within it where I could ask those silly questions without feeling like I'm bothering a senior person or like I'm embarrassing myself because I don't know this obscure thing. Having those tools helped me go way faster, but also build that foundation that helped me ask those smarter, higher level questions of the people that I worked with. So that was like a force multiplier for me. I've really experienced that, being able to ask questions of your tools and get feedback from it. And so, as engineering leaders are thinking about their own onboarding process, their own internal documentation and training, do you see, or do you have any kind of like suggestions for how somebody might really accelerate that and leave behind the stuff of the old, like and really embrace these new learning styles? What kind of opportunities do you see for them?
I think it mostly really like think about like where you are most interested and have like your strengths and weaknesses, and like really try to collaborate with the LLM from day one. Maybe you know about Git, but do you really know about Git? Can you like ask an LLM to like collaboratively like talk through it? Like maybe I know just about like how to commit, create a branch and merge, but I'm sure like there are 50 more different Git commands I've never heard about it. And especially if I prepare like for a new role or a new project, you can do a lot of like deep research or like just deep search on like trying to use those like different tools to create some kind of overview, and then like go into depth and like to the topics where you think you want to improve, where you think you are not like have not a deep knowledge, and really like want to learn something new. I mean, like it really is like using the tools every day is like how you become like very good.
Yeah. And you mentioned quite a bit about, like, using tools like Cursor and Windsurf and these agentic coding tools, and so, like, if I were Philip and I was sitting in front of my computer, like, what do you have open on a typical day? What's, like, your tool stack that you're using to learn and move really quickly?
Yeah, so I use a lot of like AI Studio. I think like normally I have like 10 different tabs open with different conversations and chats. I use Cursor for like my code editor, but also like I tried all of them. And I, even if I'm like at Google, I keep always an eye on, okay, like what is ChatGPT doing? What is Claude doing? What are like Mistral doing? Are there open source alternatives on Hugging Face? It's like very important that you don't fall down into like one specific hole and like get stuck with it, because maybe for your specific use case, you might want to use like ChatGPT because it has a better integration with like the news websites you work with or the knowledge work you do, or maybe you want to use Perplexity because it's like the Google for you. And so it's like always good to like keep an eye on like which tools are available and what is like best for your job and your use case. I mean, like, so we have now with Lovable, V0, Bold.new,
Mm.
like those
Mhm.
new like text to web app kind of tools, which weren't there like a year ago. And especially if you work like in software development and like just stick to like ChatGPT or GitHub Copilot or Cursor, you don't like learn and see about those tools, but they are like super good for like getting started or like trying to build something super quickly, super personalized. And you will not like see and learn them if you don't like try to keep yourself up to date and like what are the latest trends. And it's also very important to understand, okay, like where are we currently in terms of like AI usage and adoption and like quality, right? Like if I'm just in ChatGPT or like maybe in Gemini and I'm a software engineer and like keep asking my like typical Stack Overflow questions on like how can I reverse a list or how can I change the type, then I'm not benefiting from all of like the advancements in AI.
Yeah. And within DeepMind, how do you all share information about best practices and using this tooling? Because everyone's experimenting and trying new things all the time.
Yeah, so we like very similar to every other big organizations. There are like different teams have different preferences and different communication style. In our team, like in the DevRel team where I'm part of, we really prefer asynchronous communication and like written communication because like we are distributed all over the world. I have colleagues in Australia, in Japan, in the US. We are in Europe a few, so it's not that you like are always online at the same time. So it's like you will not have like meetings with everyone. So it's like the best way is like have written communication. We use like chats a lot, and then of course like Google Docs or like written docs is like the easiest way to share knowledge because people can take a look if they have time. They can like share comments. You can like connect with each others, and yeah, and it's searchable of course.
Yeah. I mean, being distributed all over and working that async nature, the AI kind of becomes like a highway between all of you, all of the
Yeah.
information that you're doing. We experience that too. Our team is async, not quite as distributed, but I know a lot of our listeners, they come from teams that are very distributed and they're working that exact way you just described. They're sharing those best practices, but generally in an async nature, which works pretty well for AI. AI goes at your speed, right? Um, and I want to definitely dive into some of the things that have happened recently from the Google I/O announcement because there were some announcements and definitely things coming out around Gemini and Gemma. And I wanted to ask you, Philip, as someone who's really close to the event, what recent news from Google I/O stood out to you the most?
Yeah, I think like we need to answer it in like two ways. So like I'm a developer, I'm like a DevRel engineer, and I think if I like take like this head on, I would say like the most like interesting updates for me, of course, is like the new Gemma model, which is also now becoming like Gemini Nano, which you can like run on your like local device, basically everywhere inside Chrome, hopefully soon. And it supports like text input, image input, audio input. So it's basically all of the modalities, and there's like a super cool demo from I/O where a team built like a local Astra Live basically clone where you had like your Android phone and Gemma controlled the Android phone and also saw and listened to like the camera. So basically they were like walking around with the phone and like asking questions about something they see, and then also asked Gemma to like take notes and like book something, and like Gemma basically interacted with your Android phone, which is like super cool. And then like more on like the agent side of things. So like with the new Gemini models, like the 2.5 models, there's a lot of work going into like reasoning and thinking and like really pushing like the maximum we can get in terms of intelligence. And there are like a super cool new tools like integrated into Gemini, which make it much easier to build agents. So we launched URL context, which basically allows Gemini to like retrieve context and information from a website or URL you provide and use it to answer your questions. And like the typical issue we have with LLMs is like, hey, until when they are trained, like they don't learn new things and they are limited to like what they have seen during training. So if I ask an LLM, well, what is the latest React version, it will tell me the latest React version until it has seen, right? And what all or everyone tries to fix is like, okay, how can we extend it? And like the URL context or the Google search, which we have natively integrated, basically give Gemini access to like all of the internet and all of our knowledge, which makes it super, super easy to like keep using it for like all of the up-to-date like new libraries. And like LLMs become super good at coding, right? But what if there's a new library? What if there's a new version?
Mhm.
And like with those native tools and integrations, you can like still easily use LLMs, which have a good coding understanding, but know about the new syntax, know about the new versions. And then if I'm like look from a normal guy who has seen the keynote to it, like for me, VO3 is like completely crazy. Like the now that we can generate videos from a text prompt, which are not like only images, but also generate sound and like can't prompt the model the specific dialogue we want like people to say is like completely mind blown. Like I think after now 48 hours almost, there are like so many videos already online created by the
Mhm.
community, by creator, where you cannot tell what is real and what is not real.
It's really wild. I've been watching some of those videos, and you're absolutely right that it's hard to tell the difference, especially with the audio. The more avenues in which can create kind of a media, right? It's multimedia. It's the more convincing it becomes. So it's definitely fascinating territory ahead as we figure out how to use and apply these tools and what that might look like beyond just, like a tech demo. But I wanted to click into something that you said about LLMs like on the browser and on the phone. This is a cool concept. I think this is actually kind of more novel to folks because when people think of LLMs or using something like ChatGPT, they think of like a supersized data center somewhere that's like powered by all like its own wind turbines or whatever. Like you're thinking of like a huge dedicated machine that is computing all this stuff. But then when you say, oh, you could also have it on your phone, you could have it just kind of out in the wilds. What kind of opportunities do you see for like LLMs on the edge like that?
I think there are like so many opportunities which we currently not even have thought about. Like the obvious opportunities are, hey, instead of sending your request to the server, which costs a lot of money, send it to your local model which just costs the power. So ChatGPT or like Gemini, they're like subscriptions, $20 a month. You buy your phone, which is, I don't know, a few $100s. If you can run it on there, you can ask like the same questions because like models really get so good now, even on like the smaller scale, that like the typical like day-to-day interactions where you ask like, okay, can you tell me something about this flower? That the model will like really precisely like identify the flower and like tell you something, or like ask something about like very generic question. Like all of them work now, and it's like very easy to like leverage what you have existing. But then there are like so many use cases where you might not even have like internet access. So like in Germany, in Europe, it's like, I would say still not very good when you travel or when you go hiking or something else, that you have like a connection. And if you want to like interact with your phone, you might not be able to like use your chat application, and people might say, yeah, that's not too bad, then I will use it later. But like, I mean, it's the same with everything, right? We get used to it, and maybe you will not need it, but you get so used to it that it's kind of hard for you to not use it. And like what we see and like what has been seen in like the Gemma video is like, sooner or later we will interact with our phones differently than we do today, right? If I could now like say to my phone like, hey, please book a restaurant for me and my friend James next Friday, like try to find the one he mentioned in our messages, and
Mm.
not do it manually, is like something we might or will be able to do in a year from now, and it will make our life so much easier, right? And you can argue that, yeah, you can do it already today with all of the manual work, but we want to do it like automatically or more efficient. And it's kind of the same with like having models locally. And then of course, like the biggest point is like you have like not on your data is like leaving your phone, right? If you send something to ChatGPT, there is a chance that someone will like hack OpenAI, hack your account, intercept in between, or you are not allowed to like send data across the wire because you work in like a restricted domain like medical or something else, or you need to know where your like data is located. That's where like those open models and local models really can shine.
I want to ask too, related to that, because the uses for a person individually, there's so many. What's your opinion on like how companies and engineering teams should be adopting and using models? Do you think that typically just picking something off the shelf and using a standard foundation model provider is the usual way to go, or do you see real opportunities for teams to be maybe hosting or fine tuning their own models locally?
Sadly, the easy answer is neither. Like it really depends on your use case and where you are in your AI journey. So like I'm coming from Hugging Face, I have a very strong open source background, and there are so many places where open models make so much sense, especially in companies environments. But like at the beginning, normally when you think about like trying to implement or solve something with AI, you should always go with like the easiest and like the simplest way and like the most effective and like cheapest way. And all of those hosted foundation model are only an API call away, and you only pay for the tokens you basically use for sending requests and responses, right? And very similar to all of the other solutions we built in the past, we first need to understand like, does it work? Like whatever I'm thinking about using AI for, it can be some kind of like detection from like images in my manufactory. Does it work with the current AI models? And like once I like kind of build a prototype using maybe a hosted Gemini world model where I just need to create an API key in AI Studio and then like implement it and it works, then I can start thinking about, okay, does it scale? Like what is my evaluation threshold I need to like achieve to be able to say, okay, like I need at least 80% accuracy, then it's worth it. And then I can start like really like walking down the road. Do I need to always have the model available, right? Models, hosted models, APIs can go down. Like what happens if the model is not available for an hour? Would that be a problem for me? If yes, I need to start looking into hosting it myself or even running it locally if it is possible. Do I need to know where the data is processed? Then of course I can talk to those providers. Maybe they have like some special big enterprise deals where they can share more information about it. If not, I can look into like hosting or fine tuning it myself. At the current stage, the cost aspect I think gets harder to justify, right? A few months, years ago, always a strong argument was like, hey, you can fine tune an open model. It will be cheaper based on your use case for whatever you do. But currently, like the speed is so fast on how better AI models get and how cheap they are that your internal team might not be fast enough to like spin up all of the GPUs, collect all of the training data, fine tune it to be then cheaper what's available. There might be a threshold in terms of like usage when you scale up that like token-based usage gets more expensive than like running your own GPUs. But that moved like much later than it used to be like a few months or years ago because all of this out of the box foundation models are so good at everything, and like really going down like the cost route gets harder and harder, at least for initial proof of concept. Of course, if you achieve 85% accuracy with like Gemini 2.flash and you collect a lot of data, you clean it, then it can make sense to fine-tune Gemma to achieve 90% if you really want to or need to go beyond 80% because it might solve some cost, right? If you only identify 9 out of 10s and like the 10th costs you like $10,000, then of course it's like a different story. But like the whole like compute cost comparison gets harder and harder because model iteration happens so fast, and with every new model iteration the cost goes down. I think like since GPT-4, like the same level of intelligence was decreased by almost 300x. So for GPT-4 you paid like I think like $60 per like 1 million tokens or something, and now with Gemini 2.0 Flash you have like the same level of intelligence. It's like 40 cents or something. So like the cost is going down so crazy, and it will keep going down. At least that's what we are expecting. So yeah, like there are very, very good reasons why open models might be the right approach, but I would always go with like what works, start with what works, what is the easiest to get implemented, and then focus on evaluation. And once you have evaluation, you can like start looking at cost, and not only the cost, the model cost, like what's really the total cost, like how much does it change if your use case is like 5 to 10% more accurate, or like the response is better. And then like all of like the security and compliance, of course, is like a big point on where open models shine.
It's a really effective playbook for how to evaluate when to use what, and then it comes down to moving quickly and then understanding the constraints that you and your problem are operating within. So that's a really useful playbook. And I want to double click on something that you mentioned in there that maybe some of our listeners are wondering as well, is if you could explain for us or really break down the difference between Gemini and Gemma and Gemini Nano. Like what are the differences, and how should people be looking at them?
Yeah, so Google Gemini, or especially Google DeepMind Gemini, is the foundation model out of like DeepMind. We currently are at the model family 2.5, where there's a Google Gemini 2.5 Flash, which is the most cost-effective model. That's why it's called Flash. And there's also 2.5 Pro, which is like the most intelligent model we currently make. And Gemma is done by a different research team at Google DeepMind, but as the name suggests, they're very familiar to each other. And the Gemma team works very closely with the Gemini team to benefit from like the research which is done. And Gemma is an open model and is really focused on local usage, single GPU usage. So Gemma 3, which was released in March, comes in 4 sizes with like 1B, 4B, 12B, and 27B. And 27B like still fits on like a single medium-sized GPU, which you can like rent on like Google Cloud for like $500 a month or something. And 1 or 4B or even like 12B fit on mobile phones. And like the bigger you get, like the 27B easily runs like on a more modern MacBook Pro. So like the focus for Gemma is really on like enabling everyone to be able to run models locally, play with it, benefit from it. And like Gemini, as it's the hosted model, where compute constraints are much different. Like we can really focus on, okay, what is the best intelligence we can get in? Like how can we make the model the most cost effective for the customer? That's why I mentioned like hosting might not be like the cheapest way in terms of like use currently. But yeah, like both teams work very close with each other. Important to remember, Gemini is like the hosted model you can access via an API. And Gemma is the model, the open model, which you can fine tune yourself, which you can download, which you can run on your phone, which you can run on your computer, available to use without internet, with internet.
That's a great breakdown. I appreciate you kind of giving us the scoop on that because I've been exploring and looking at the tools, and there's so much available. And in this conversation, I've learned a lot about how these types of AI tools are also getting used on the edge and on devices that maybe people don't typically think an LLM will run on. And that opens up so many more use cases and opportunities for teams to build new solutions to make our world better. So, Philip, I really appreciate you breaking that down for us. And since this conversation and the video now has gone on for more than 8 seconds, that's a verification for everyone that we are real and everything that we talked about was real. So, Philip, if folks wanted to follow up with you or learn more about the work that you're doing, where can they go to find out more about Philip and DeepMind?
Yeah, so I'm on like social media. I'm on like Twitter and on like LinkedIn. Like Phil Schmid is my Twitter handle, also on GitHub. And yes, like if you have questions related to Gemini, to Gemma, if you have feedback on where we can improve documentation or where we are missing examples, or like just curious about things, like don't hesitate. We value every feedback. We are always happy to like talk to you to help you build with Gemini. Like that's the whole mission of like the DeepMind DevRel team, is like really enable everyone from like senior to junior to even non-AI or software engineer to be able to benefit from like AI.
That's amazing. And I want to echo that as well. If you're listening to this and you're trying out these tools, anything from DeepMind, whether that's Gemini or Gemma or anything in between, and you're building new tech with this, we want to hear from you. Come on to LinkedIn, message us, reach out to us with the things that you're hacking on. You can join our Substack as well and comment under the newsletter where we're going to give the scoop on Philip and all the things we talked about today. You're listening to this podcast on a podcast provider. Leave a comment there. Like join our conversation. And I'm going to be sharing and reposting all the stuff that I see from our listeners that are building with your tool stack. So definitely join the party because we're talking every week about these groundbreaking techs, and it's really great to hear what our listeners are building. So thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Dev Interrupted.